Alright, got a new kit here we're going to put together today. This one's kind of different. We have a Squonk kit. I do have a larger example here. This is the 26650 kit that I was working on. It's pretty interesting. Still working out a few of the bugs on this one. Just got to get everything to fit a little bit better, although it is pretty much done. So if you don't know what squonking is, as you can see in the box here, you press on this bottle and it shoots juice up through the 510 connector into the atomizer, and it juices it from the bottom. So there's no dripping, you just squeeze and there you go. Due to space constraints, as you can see, this is the larger 1590B box, and this has a 26650 in it, but there's not room for 2 batteries. And likewise, in the 1590G box, this is a dual battery one that I made before, but you can see that there's no way 2 batteries and a Squonk bottle could fit in here. So it's just going to be one 18650, and it does work pretty well. You don't get the well, it does leak juice, we can see that, but you don't get the extended battery life or the extra voltage from wiring it in series. So this is a new kit. Most of this is thanks to Fat Daddy Vapes, and we'll throw their logo in here again because this is only possible because of the awesome parts they sell. In the kit here, they have a much more larger and complicated Essential Squonk kit. It's got more tubing, and it's got 3 of these metal tubes, and it's got a bunch of gaskets. I've cut it down to make it more affordable because you pretty much only need this for one kit. So there's 2 different kinds of tubing, 2 O-rings, and this stainless steel metal tube, and I'll go into and explain that a little bit better as we get into the video. So get my own branding out here. Since we only have a single 18650, we got the smaller sled, and it comes with a juice bottle that will fit in the 1590G box. So there's that. You're not going to need the cap, but I have a ton of them anyway. The other important part is this bottom fed 510 connector, and that's what lets the juice come up from the bottom. So unfortunately I don't have these in the assortment of colors that I normally do, but as you can see, this just screws in. This is still spring loaded, so it'll make good connection with your atomizer. And the only other little part is this interesting and rather well engineered, if you ask me, positive connector here. So there's all that. So that's the special bottom feed. I don't know if the camera can see it, but you can see it goes all the way through. That's the bottom fed 510 connector. And we got a standard black button, assortment of heat shrink tubing, and since this is the unregulated MOSFET box, we got our little no-name Box Mods MOSFET board here, and that will handle all the power switching and everything to make it safe. 4 grub screws and 4 magnets for the magnetic enclosure, and one 15 amp fuse because we only have 1 battery. So that's it. There's also comes with a standard black powder coat 1590G box from Hammond, and that's what the kit entails. One other quick note before we get started building. I do have a bunch of other options on the website for customizing these boxes. Includes different buttons, and in this case I'm going to swap out a few parts. Instead of the black box, I'm going to use this Illusion crabapple green box. It's kind of sparkly. For some reason, nobody's bought any of these yet, or bought any of these yet. So I figured I would showcase a box in the hopes that someone would see how cool it is, because I think they look fantastic. Also, let's see here, I'm going to swap out these regular nickel plated magnets for these black epoxy ones, and I figure that will look good with the green box. So you will see those differences in the build, but otherwise it's all available on the website. Alright, so here's the mandatory tool talk. That kind of sounded funny, but hand drill, definitely need one of those. Totally optional is a drill press, but it is very helpful. For drill bits, we're going to use a step drill bit, and we'll get two different sizes, one for the 510 connector and one for the button out of it. 1/4 inch drill bit for the magnet holes in the lid, so that'll fit right there. And kind of optional, but I use it in every video and I forget to mention it, so hammer and punch for marking where the holes go. And then right here, this is just a kind of a low profile drill press vise, I think is what it's technically called. I just do all my drilling on here, and that is bolted to a 3/4 inch piece of MDF. Very helpful because you can swap these out and conserve on your workbench space. Other than that, definitely need safety glasses, always helpful, always necessary rather, when you're doing drilling. And if you go with the voltmeter option, you can check out some of my other videos on how to cut out the voltmeter slot, but pretty much you're always going to end up using a small drill bit like an 1/8 inch and a rotary tool of some sort to cut that out, so keep that in mind. We won't be doing any voltmeter in this build video, although I am pretty confident you could find some place to fit it in this build. So there's that. Let's get started. Alright, let's talk about the drilling diagram. So on the product page, if you go to the link in the description or whatever, there will be a PDF, SVG, or PNG file of this drilling diagram. This is the standard 1590G. So when you print this out, don't print it out in your browser. Your browser likes to add on all these margins and it'll squish this, and it needs to be the exact size. So when you do print it out, take your ruler and check this scale box up here. It should be 1 inch by 1 inch on those lines. So make sure you check that. And then all you gotta do is cut out these boxes. So we got different positions for the 510 connector, and I'm actually going to do this different from pretty much all my other builds because of what we have to stuff in this little box here. But the key here is cut outside the lines. You want them pretty much exactly outside the line. Don't cut it on the line. Because of the program I use, the lines are part of the dimensions, so just be careful there. You're going to cut all these out, and I'm going to talk about what some of these dashed lines mean and why they're arranged the way they are. So let me just get this here, and we'll demonstrate. Alright, so 1/2 inch for the button. It's got the areas marked out, but what you really want to pay attention to, try to zoom in a little bit here, camera stop shaking. So we got these vertical dashed lines on the ends here, and those correspond to the screw posts on the inside of the box. This is helpful to line up where the template's supposed to go on the side of the box. So you just want to make sure those dashed lines are lined up. And the other thing to notice is on both of these, this center line is off center for this cutout, and that's because the cutout is the exact same size as the box, which accounts for the thickness of the lid, so when you drill the button is nice and centered. So that's why you want this kind of narrower end to the open side of the box and not the back. So keep that in mind. And the other thing I was talking about is normally I go with So this is the right-hand drawing, not the wrong-handed one. I usually put that on, if you're looking at the box, so top. This is going to be the left side, and that's where I usually put the button. And then normally, in pretty much all my other videos, I put the button on the far side, so the button isn't too close to the 510 connector. But if we put the button on this side and the 510 connector on this side, then we either have to seriously modify the battery sled, which I want to avoid, or use a different button. So I'm just going to simplify it. Move the battery over here. The 510 connector will be on the near side, so we'll use this one. And I'll drill straight down in and should clear the button and the wires coming out of it pretty easy. So not too worried there. That's about the only thing really different we're going to do here. So let me get that cut out. Now there's two ways you can do this. You can grab a glue stick and just stick these on, which is what I do if I don't have templates made. Or you can just kind of hold it in place and punch it with a hammer. Much faster in my opinion. If you're doing a voltmeter cutout, do the glue method. Use a children's glue stick. You can just wash it right off. So I always forget to zoom out here. Since I'm working with a nice box here, I'm going to tape it up real quick, just using painter's tape. And this is just the 2-inch wide stuff. Fits perfectly on the 1590G boxes. And get that extra off. This will just keep this nice clear coat unscratched while we're working on it. Should be nice. Next up, so I'll throw a slice on there too. Found with the black powder coat, I think it's actually a Cerakote on there. You don't actually need the tape, but I have enough aluminum dust and shards running around the place here that I've scratched up a box before and then had to spend a good half hour polishing the scratches out, so I want to avoid that. Alright, so template, line it up with the screw posts, and right about there. Make sure that's all flush, and grab the punch. Give it a tap. So notice it's off center just a little bit. The camera can even pick that up. And then we'll do the other side for the 510 connector. Got that lined up. Now, if you drill this right, there should be just enough room for the locking nut and negative ring to fit next to the screw post here. So keep that in mind. Alright, so our box is marked, and I'm going to drill out the rest of that in a little bit. First thing I'm going to do though is turn the camera and drill out the holes for the magnet, which I'll go over quickly. I'll do one and then just kind of speed through it. So. one there, and what I like to do, get this so the light, is test fit a magnet in it. I'm going to be using these black ones, but they're pretty much the same size. So that's a good flush fit. I don't know, again, how well I can see it, but this is almost going all the way through. There's just a little bit of metal left there. So otherwise the epoxy should be able to hold it in no problem. Alright, get the rest of these finished. Make sure I drilled far enough, fit all the magnets, and I'm just making sure they're flush here. That one could use just a little bit more. And that ought to be good. So that is the lid in all its glaring glory from off the fluorescence here, with the magnet holes drilled. Next up, we're going to use the hand drill with the stepped drill bit. You can get 3 different stepped drill bit in a package for like $9 at Harbor Freight. So they come in all different sizes. The key ones here we're going to use are 7/16, which I have marked with a Sharpie, and 1/2 inch. So the 510 connector is, I believe, 10 millimeters wide, and unfortunately I do not have any metric stepped drill bits, so I have to make do with the Imperial sizes. You could go down 1 step on this, and I found if you do that, then you have to file it out a little. The extra little wiggle room is not much of a concern at all. It actually makes fitting everything in there a little bit easier because you can reposition the 510 connector a little bit. So I'm just clamping this down and get this in the hand drill. Good. And not that this is going to be a very good camera shot, but this is going to be the 7/16 hole in the top. Now it is okay if you over drill these holes a little bit. Both the 510 connector and the button have a flange that will cover that up, so don't need to worry about it too much. And I just like to dust off all these metal bits before I do the next hole. Next up is the 1/2 inch hole for the button. Now with the black button that comes standard with the kit, there's this extra little bit of, I don't know, it's kind of like a locking flash or whatever you want to call it. Basically there's a little rim on the very underneath of the button And I'm trying to get these stupid washers off. Let's see if I can get the camera to see it here. So there's that little lip right around on the edge. Found if you intentionally over drill it just a little bit with a step drill bit, the button will drop down into that flush and it won't be an issue. So kind of went a little bit further and dug it down and recessed it a little just to get the black button to fit there. So that is the drilling. If you got the voltmeter with the package, honestly I think it would be a pretty tough fit with this one. I'll put the option on there, but I'm totally not guaranteeing that you'll be able to fit a voltmeter in there with all of this going on. And I still have to fit the 510 connector in here as well, or I'm sorry, the MOSFET board. It's a lot to fit, so I wouldn't suggest it honestly. So drilling, next up we will wire up the MOSFET board. Alright, let's talk soldering tools. As you can see, not too much for tools here. Definitely need wire strippers and cutters. I use this little pair of bent needle nose pliers quite a bit. Much better than these straight ones, if you ask me. These are just kind of vertical wire nippers. Very useful for getting in tight places where these can't. Forceps, just for jiggling parts around, getting in tight places. A soldering iron. This is, what is this? This is a 15 watt. That's kind of low end from Radio Shack. Probably want closer like 35, 40 maybe, to be able to melt solder easily. Personally, I haven't used that one in over a year. What I use now is this Hacko FX 888D. It's a digital soldering iron, digital temp control rather. It is about 90 bucks, but I use it every day, so I do not feel bad about the investment in that one. Solder, I use 6040 rosin core. I also use quite a bit of flux just to make sure everything gets put together nice and clean. For wire, probably want 16 or 14 gauge wire. 16 gauge fits no problem in the MOSFET board. 14, you might have to force it a little, maybe trim it. So I got red and black for the 16 gauge, and then I got some 22 gauge for running the non-load bearing wires. You're gonna want something to hold stuff with. If you have one of these, you know, good on you. I personally hate these third-hand tools. They're terrible. They don't work very well. They're hard to position. You can see down here is El Squiddo, and this is, I don't remember where I originally saw this online. Somebody posted something like this, and basically these are air tubes for like CNC machines or whatever. You can get 6 of them on Amazon for like, I don't know, 12 bucks or something. Really cheap, and alligator clips fit right in the end, and then you can throw some heat shrink tubing on the jaws to make them a little bit more circuit friendly, as it were. So that's El Squiddo. People always ask me where you get these things. If you look on SparkFun, they have these tubes and a nice little alligator clip setup for a really reasonable price. I would suggest that. The other thing you'll see me use in this video for stripping wire is this automatic wire stripper. Totally optional. I love this thing though because it just, you just stick the wire in it. It's done. So that's it for tools, and next we'll get together and start putting wires onto the little MOSFET board. So here's the MOSFET board. You can find the wiring diagram for all of this same place that you found the drilling diagram on the product page. Thought I'd go over the connections here real quick. On the right hand side we have the negative 510 connection. That's going to be 16 gauge at least, going to the 510 connector. And then kind of in the middle here we have this big one that goes to the negative post on the battery. And then these two right here go to the firing button. Kind of two in the middle right here go to the voltmeter if you have that option. Again, I don't really think it's going to fit in this box. Might fit in the 26650 version, but I think it's kind of pushing it. And then this last one is the battery plus. That's a logic circuit, and that's what drives these MOSFETs. So I've had a few calls and emails saying I forgot to put the MOSFETs in the kit. So these are the two MOSFETs right here. This little thing right here is the resistor, and this is the lockout switch, and it has 3 positions. In the leftmost position, it is off, and I just knocked it silly here. In the leftmost position, the whole mod is off. The power isn't cut, mind you, but you can't fire it through the fire button. Middle position, it will fire, but it will not show the voltmeter. And the right position, it will fire and it will show the voltmeter. So keep that in mind. Let's zoom out here a little bit and we can get started. So the way I make these these actual MOSFET boards when I do them, I use a reflow oven and a solder mask and everything, so I'm not hand soldering these. And you can kind of see that there is some bare copper around these larger connections here. And what we're going to do is fill in and kind of build up some of that and stick the wire through basically. So I'm cutting an excessively long piece of wire here, very long. Not that you can even see it in the photo, but let's just make sure it reaches the 510 and cut another one not so long. Mostly just to make this fast and easy. So let's get these on here. I do have my soldering iron on, and I believe it's up to temp now. It is fast like that. So off screen here, I'm setting up some flux just so I can dip these wires in. And let's do the short one first. I like to go in and solder them so the wires come out the top, and that cuts down the amount of space that the wires themselves take up with this switch and everything here. So first thing I want to do is build up some solder. My last video, I kind of looked like an idiot doing this, but hopefully this one goes a little better. I am going to tin up this wire too, just to make sure it gets a good connection. And really what we're doing is building a solder bridge between the MOSFET gate and source to the wire, and that's the most important part here. Make sure we get that critical connection nice and solid basically. So I'm going to get a little bit of solder on my iron and warm up the spot where that hole is. And have the same trouble that I did in the last video. There we go. So that wire's in there now, and what I'm going to do is touch it up on the other side and make sure it's got a nice solid connection. There's nothing really connecting to these on this side of the board, but it is a good idea nonetheless. Let that cool off. And we'll do the same thing to the other side. tin this wire up. And make sure this has a nice solder bridge on it. Get a little bit more flux on there. And of course that one went right in. And I'll secure that on the other side. So that's our two main big connections here. And I think this time I'm going to use some green wire for the button. I made a mistake last time and almost mixed up the button switches and the positive wire, so we use some green wire for that. I am making these kind of extra long too. Come to think of it, that is not going to be long enough. So, kind of probably. The thing I'm trying to keep in mind here is I'm planning on putting the MOSFET board at the bottom here, and then got to run it all the way up to and out this hole for the button to get soldered onto. So, yeah, kind of wasting a little wire here, but it's not that big of a deal. Get these stripped. Turn this back over. And this time I'm just going to feed the wire in and solder it from the other side. These are just logic circuits, so here, let's do it the right way. Not hugely, it's not a big load on these wires at all. That one. And get that one. Okay, one more wire here, and that will be the battery positive. That's the last one on the left here. And I'm just gonna make sure that's long enough. I just have trouble fitting these in here. Should just twist them up. Pretty sure this is 22 gauge wire I'm trying to fit in this hole here. we go. Pretty sure that's still on camera. Okay, so that's the wires on the board at least. So positive, switch, battery negative, 510 negative. And if we bend these wires to the side, get that to focus. Come on, camera. Alright, there we go. Looks like got a pretty good solder bond across all of those, so that shouldn't be an issue. Let's see here. What I'm trying to figure out now is which way these wires are going to go out. And that'll probably make it the easiest if they all go out this left hand side here. So I'm just kind of creasing these over and arranging them, because the next step we're going to do is heat shrink all of this after we trim off the back here. And this is one of those cases where these nippers are very handy. You want to get these trimmed down quite a bit. You don't want to cut them all the way off, obviously. But what we want to avoid is these poking through the heat shrink tubing and grounding on the box or anything like that. So that's pretty good. One thing I always forget to mention in the tool section is a heat gun. Totally not necessary, but it saves you a lot of headache, and you won't burn anything trying to do it with a lighter. So we have our heat shrink tubing here, and that will just insulate everything. Fit the board in. And I like to get it past both sides a little bit, just to make sure. And then we hit it with a heat gun. And then on this side, I like to pinch it off with the pliers so we can trim it down some with the scissors. We'll use a nice little end on it. And then once that cools, I'll use an X-Acto knife to cut out where the switch is. And I think due to the size of the box, might have to trim off a little bit of that. Just to get everything to come out of the end there. Yeah, it's a pretty tight fit. So I just use the nippers here, being careful not to get the wire, and go around, just kind of cut a ring off this. Go. Now notice that kind of got close to the 510 connector there, but that's going to be grounded on the box anyways, so not a huge worry. So here's kind of what we're looking at so far. Let me get these threaded in here, make it kind of obvious. The positive we're going to put at the top. So that's where that red wire is going. The shorter black wire is actually going to get cut off quite a bit because it's going to go to the bottom of the battery sled here. So I'll just bend that one around. Button wires are going to go out like that. And the 510 negative will kind of snake up here and probably end about like that. So if we throw our battery sled in here, let's start to get an idea of how that's going to work out. Next up, we'll start connecting up the 510 connector and get this onto the battery sled. Maybe not in that order. Alright, so battery sled. We do have to make some slight modifications to this, nothing too major. First thing I'm going to do is pull out these battery contacts. The nice thing about these sleds is they come with these gold-plated contacts, which is kind of nifty. For all the people who like to eke every last mile out of their box mod, they're like, oh boy, it's gold-plated. So unfortunately they also have this tab on them, and that I just break off by bending it. And then we're going to have to find a way to grind these down just a little bit so they don't come in contact with the box. If they did, we'd be looking at a short situation, and that would be bad. So I'm going to grab a little mini bench grinder that I have and grind them down real quick. If you don't have a mini bench grinder as such, what you can do is use a file. You could use sandpaper. You could use one of those grinding bits on your Dremel if you have one of those. Pretty much any option will work. We're not looking to take too much off, maybe at most 2 millimeters. So do that real quick. So just to show the difference here, the camera can see that. So I got those pretty much lined up. There we go. That's about how much I took off. So do the other one real quick. So we got our contacts halfway modified. Next up, just move these tools here so we can see. I like to bend this flat area, so you can see right here at the end on the inside. If you don't bend that a little bit, they tend to tear up the wraps on your batteries. So what I like to do is grab these bent needle nose and just kind of grab it by that flat area and drop it. And then I just kind of like roll it on the table and it bends it like that. So do that. And you have 2 modified battery contacts. Those can go right back in the sled so you don't lose them. And the other thing we're going to want to do is cut off these retaining tabs. And since these are supposed to go on like a circuit board, there's also these little pegs on the bottom. I just snip them off. And then hobby knife just to clean it up a little bit. There we go. Okay, and then these tabs here, I just score them with a knife right along the edge. And you can use your pliers to snap them off. There we go. It does leave a little bit of that white plastic, and I just kind of clean it up a little so it's not rough. Otherwise, it's really not that big of a deal. Now, since we're using a single battery, you'll note that there are some charge pull direction indicators, so we'll try to follow those when we put it together. So that's modifying the battery sled. Alright, let's start getting this thing together here. So I'm going to do a little bit of test fitting, just to kind of measure how long these wires need to be and what we can get away with. I guess part of this is experience and knowing how much extra wire you need for things to get where they need to go. Here I've just fit the MOSFET board with all its wires and everything in, and just kind of shove the wire in here, and I'm going to trim it off flush basically with the battery sled. And I think that'll be enough. Mostly positive it will be. For the wire leading to the negative 510, I'm just going to kind of snake it up here and go a circuitous route around where the bottle will be. Grab that here. So the bottle will be nested in right about there. There's barely going to be any tubing connecting the bottle to the 510 connector, but that'll be fine. And I'm just going to kind of bend this back, and I want it to end right about where the edge of the hole is. So I will grab the wire cutters and get it about there. So that's part of it. Button wires I'm going to leave long for the moment because we want to. The only downside really of these black buttons is they don't have any screw posts, so we're going to have to solder the wires onto that. So we want those to be long enough that we can reach everything. Let's see, the positive wire has to go up here to the top of the battery sled. So that's actually looking a little shorter than I'd want it to be, but it'll reach. I'm not trying to win any prizes here for making this box pretty, mostly just functional. And then the only other thing we have to worry about is connecting the fuse. Grab that here. So our little tiny fuse, I'll include it in this one. And this is the positive connector for the 510. And basically you just solder the wire right into that little end there, and then that slips over the post here on the bottom feed. So it's kind of cool. Makes it a lot easier to assemble too, might I add. So it's just going to be a really short wire to get that to connect, and we'll have to be careful because these fuses are kind of delicate. So that's what we're looking at now. I'll probably start here at the bottom of the sled and get that on. So we'll strip some wire. About that long will probably do it. One cool thing about these gold sleds, back this out a little bit here, they solder up a lot easier than the other, I don't think they're silver, they're some sort of other shiny metal, but these ones solder up a lot easier, which is kind of cool. So I'm just going to put a little bit of flux on this contact, and that's the positive end. So a little bit of flux on the contact, just to make it easier to solder. And I have found tinning up the wire before you try to solder it onto the contact does help. So that is advisable. Alrighty. And it's going to kind of end up like that, so I'm just going to pin this in place here. Really want to avoid a situation where the wire might be contacting the box. So that's pretty much the only thing we have to be careful of here. That is connected, and I'll just kind of, while the insulation here is still warm, kind of jiggle it around so that's not too much of an issue. And earlier I said I was going to cut out a pocket for the switch on the board. So it's pretty easy. Just take your knife and make 2 perpendicular cuts and then just connect them together. And voila, the little switch is exposed. So now we're good with that. Next thing, just to do well, it's kind of out and not too much of a mess. They're going to connect the negative ring, and that looks like it's going to be a pretty good fit. So take the negative ring off of the 510 connector. There we go. This is pretty easy to solder. The only real trick I use is just take a little bit of flux and dab it in this little hole right here. And if you get that to suck up the solder, there we go, maybe you can see that a little better. So that little hole right there. And get this stripped. So you don't want to make this bit of wire too long. You don't want it to impede tightening the nut. So having it end before this outer circle is probably a good idea. And just going to take a bit of solder on my iron, hold that in place, and basically just let it cook off that flux. There we go. Good connection. Next up, let's do the positive connector. So first I'm going to put some wire into this, and again, the only trick I use here is flux. So dabbing flux into this little pocket hole here. And I'll cut some red wire. So this is the 16 gauge stuff. Again, this is way longer than it's going to need to be. So the method I like to use here is, again, tin the wire up a little bit. give us good purchase for getting it in there. Now, I did intentionally kind of strip off more, and you can see that there is there is a little bit of the wire showing there, and personally I kind of prefer that because then I can heat up with a soldering iron and basically just feed the solder in there until it cooks all that flux out. There we go. So you can see, come on camera, there we go. Got a nice little cone of solder all the way around. Looks to be pretty good connection. It's not pulling out or anything. Alright, so next part, I'm going to test fit our 510 connector. And get an idea. So this slides right on there. Get an idea where the 510 connection is going to end up. It's going to be right about there. And since we're going to put the positive, we're going to put the fuse on there. Basically just going to trim that off a little bit longer and strip off just a little bit of the wire here. It's basically about the width of the contact on the fuse. Add a little bit of flux on there. There we go. I'm going to do this one at a right angle. I did this in the last video and it actually seemed to work pretty well, which I was kind of surprised by. Getting these to line up is another issue. Alright, so it's going to be a little warm for a second. I'm just going to trim off that extra wire. There we go. Next up, we need to connect this positive wire to the positive battery post. And I'm just going to strip some of that off. Again, I'll tin this up. So if you've watched the other videos, this is pretty much exactly the same, except with a single battery at this point. Take care of this wire first, and then we'll get the fuse on. There's that, and here we go. Should have rotated that a little bit more. Crap. Alright, first thing I'm going to do is get that fuse on there. So I'm just building up a little bit of solder on the contact. And just to make sure the fuse sticks, I'm putting a little flux on it. Okay, so the problem I'm seeing right now is, actually that's not too bad. And again, that's exactly what we want to avoid doing. And I'm pretty sure I just broke that. Alright, I don't think that's going to stand up to being man-handled while being replaced, so, or being installed. Just going to take that off. And burn myself. Alright, so I'm going to grab another fuse here. Should note these fuses, I don't know, I really don't like installing them, but a lot of people insisted I put them in the kit, so I did. Hope you appreciate that. Let's see here. So this time I'm just going to put the fuse on first. Try to anyways. Okay, if I was going to take some more time, I'd probably throw some epoxy under there, but not really doing that at this moment. So this time I'm going to try a little bit harder to get this oriented so this can slide onto the positive pin here without much issue. And looking at it, it's going to be about like that. Try number 2 on the positive fuse. So basically, if you break a fuse, you can leave it out if you want to. I'm not going to tell the box mod police, or you can shoot me an email, provided you bought the kit from me, and I'll sell you another one cheap. I would note that ordering things from Mouser, your shipping alone is going to be at least $5, and on a $1 part, that is kind of ridiculous. here we go. I'm going to get this started with the negative 510 connector. It is mostly going to consist of just getting this nut locked down. If I can remember to get it in camera here. So most of the time I suggest using a quarter to lock these down, but this specific 510 connector doesn't really have any grooves, so that's kind of an issue. Get this negative wire here to snake back. Being careful not to break that fuse again. And I'm going to thread the 510 positive on there. There we go. Alright, this is going to be a little trickier than I thought. Alright, let's go the other way with that. So we'll get that on there. And get this whole bundle settled. So there, I was just adjusting that negative wire, trying to get it to sit in there nice. Now it's just going to be a matter of getting this in there without breaking that fuse again. Which I think might be more of a joke here than I was thinking. Okay, there's a point with every box mod where you struggle a little bit with it, and I think right now it's going to be this step. And just manipulating the basic geometry of this. So like I warn in all my videos, you got to be careful of that little blue Delrin insert on these 510 connectors. Delrin's pretty soft and you can strip the threading pretty easily if you're not careful. If you wanted to make this a little bit less clean and a little bit easier to assemble, making that red wire that connects the fuse to the 510 here a little bit longer probably would have made this all a little bit easier. And that is putting a little bit of stress on that fuse, but I think it's mostly happy. When we do final assembly, it might not be a bad idea to glob some epoxy around that. Alright, so let's see here. Next up, probably talk about the actual squonk parts a little bit. So you got two different pieces of tubing here. Well, I guess 3 tubes really. So this clear kind of IV tubing, I think is what it actually is. This stuff goes down into the bottle. And what you do is you'll insert this pin into the needle nose area of the bottle. And this tubing comes up from the bottom, so we can get all the way to the bottom of the squonk bottle. And then this stuff is a lot more flexible, and it just connects this metal pin to the bottom of the 510 connector. So what I did before is I take and trim off a little bit of the nozzle of the bottle here, and that will let the metal pin get inserted in there. Maybe have to trim off a little bit more. In the end, it may be easier to go from the bottom. Alright, I think I used a different bottle when I made this last time, but I'm just going to make this hole a little bit wider. Probably use a screwdriver or just about anything. Go. Took a little bit of the plastic off, but it'll work. Alright, so the idea here is you sandwich this lid that goes to the bottle in between this tubing and this tubing. So basically just gonna cut off some of this stuff. It's a little bit shorter than the height of the bottle. And jam this tubing down into it. Now this was another frustrating part for me, because trying to push a tube down another tube is not very easy. Try the needle nose here to just kind of wiggle and feed it onto the tube. Part of the problem here is you really want to get this snugged up to the bottom of this lid so it keeps a tight seal on it. And I think that's really the whole trick to this squonking, basically. You want to be able to keep pressure in this bottle, so when you squeeze it, it all goes up the tube to the atomizer. And in this case, I think I kind of made that a little too short. Not really sure how I managed that. Great. So I'm going to pull that off, hopefully without collapsing this tube here. There we go. And in an effort to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to shorten this tube. I think if we look at this, yeah, that's kind of a problem. So, probably should have looked at that before. So we're going to have to make some room down here at the bottom. I think if I have a saw or something to cut this with. Do a little hack job here. Sure to blow that out. Don't want any of that stuff getting in your juice. Alright, so that is now a little bit shorter, which will make all of this easier. Amazingly, that fits in there. I'm going to trim off a little bit more of that nozzle area. And then try to get this tubing in here. Honestly, I wish I could think of a trick to make this easier. There's kind of a crimping area on these wire strippers that I'm grabbing it with. I don't know if this is actually helping anything. Okay. I don't really recall having this much issue with this the last time, but hey, that's box mount building for you. I think mostly what's working here is stretching this tube down this steel tube and then kind of pushing more of it onto it. Alright, we're getting pretty close here. So just kind of test fitting this here. Still kind of long. Alright. There's that. That is pretty close to being perfect. So now we have to cut a short piece of this other flexible stuff, the silicone stuff. And let's kind of get a measurement here. Call it yay long. Alright, so again the whole idea is you snug one of these tubes up against the other so they create a good seal with this lid. And the other thing we need to do is just trim this off a little bit, otherwise it's going to make it all sit wonky. I would say that's about perfect. Next, got to feed that little tube, the flexible silicone stuff, onto the bottom of the 510 connector. Hopefully without breaking anything. There we go. Get it started. Okay, so there's that. Now, probably should have done this a little earlier, but we can do it now. See how this button is going to end up in here. And that is a little close, I have to admit, but not a huge deal. So what we'll do is thread this nut from the button onto these wires and send them out the buttonhole. And just to give us a little bit more clearance there, I'm going to slightly bend these contacts off to the side. Be careful not to break them. There we go. And then you can grab some of the heat shrink tubing that came with the kit. Or actually, alright, that's probably not going to matter too much because of the way I'm going to solder these on, but we will put it on these wires. Now we're going to trim these back a little bit. What we want is there to be some play when the button gets kind of pushed back in here, but also give us enough room to work. So I'm going to do about a finger's length outside of the box there. And strip off a little bit of each of these. we go. So we got the nut on the inside, that's important. And grab the button here. And I'm going to try to line these up with how they're going to get soldered on. Dip the wire in a little bit of flux just to help it along. There. Grab some more flux here. Okay, so that is up. Guess we can try to bring these heat shrink tubes. Yeah, that's not going to do anything. But the important thing is getting this nut down here. So again, that might be a little bit too much wire. And if you want to, you can kind of go back and clean that up a bit. Now, in my last video, I fiddled with getting this nut onto this button for like a good 10 minutes, I want to say. Hoping this one cooperates. Some people might have been tempted to screw the button in place first and then solder these contacts on. And honestly, if you want to do that, that might be a little easier. There is actually plenty of room in this box for that. One thing that is kind of hitting on there is that negative wire. I think if I move that out of the way, it's going to be a little bit more cooperative. But the only thing I can suggest for this is if you can get the final nut placement to be flat at the top there, that will make the lid a little bit easier to fit in the long run. So kind of like about how I have it now. It's flat up here. And that's pretty tight. go. Yeah, that's where it's gonna end up, I guess. Alright, so now we just need to hide these wires down in here. Again, I could have made those a little bit shorter. Would have made it harder to solder this up though. So, kind of a trade-off. But that is basically it there. The only thing I would note, when we did the drilling earlier, this is going to be kind of like one of those optional decisions for you, is whether or not you want a hole in the box. And you're going to want that to line up with that bottle there. So, for the aesthetics of this box, I think popping the magnetic lid off and giving it a squeeze isn't that much. I don't know, it's kind of a personal preference thing, I guess. So right now the lid isn't fitting because what I said about that nut there on the button. So I'm going to have to take the Dremel and knock that down a little bit, or you can use a file. And the only thing we have left to do is install the magnets and the grub screws. So finish that up here. First I'll glue in the magnets and then I'll do the grub screws, since we can let the epoxy dry then. Alright, so epoxy. If you're just doing one box, I would suggest a bottle, the 2 tubes of DevCon 5-minute quick cure epoxy. If you're going to go make a bunch of boxes, you want something that's a little bit more economical. I like this stuff a lot, Bob Smith Industries 5-minute quick cure, and I'm just setting out everything I need here. So I'm separating these magnets, and not very well because they just stuck together again. And this will just make it easier to put them in place. I'm going to grab a couple of craft sticks here. And going for, let me move that a little. Say maybe a nickel's worth of epoxy. For each part. Go. Now this is a little bit overkill for the magnets, but I'm also going to try to glue down the battery sled while I have some epoxy mixed up. So real quick, mix this stuff up. There we go. Now, what I use for this is a magnetic screwdriver to pick up the magnet. And the other thing I'm going to do is quickly dab up. So that's about how much glue I'm using. And just dab it in and kind of swirl it around so it gets all over the sides. And then rotate the plate. So I'm trying to keep the distance I travel with the glue over the lid as short as possible, just to avoid getting epoxy where it shouldn't be. A little bit more there. Okay, so pick the magnet up with a screwdriver and then place it down into the hole, make sure it's flush, and then with a wooden stick or something like that, push the screwdriver off and just make sure it's flush. And then you can quickly repeat this with each one. And then we can set that aside. I think those black magnets look pretty nice with that. So right now this is pretty well friction fit in here. I'm just going to pry the sled up a little bit and scoop up a glob of the epoxy and just try to drag it onto the sled so it scrapes it off underneath. And then you just push it back down. If you have some clamps, not a terrible idea at this point. And then you can take another little stick and get some of that globbed up glue off. So that's about it. For the grub screws, you're just going to need a small hex key, and they screw into the screw post, and I just covered one in epoxy, so that's great. Kind of fumbling it here today. So just screw them down into the screw post holes. You want them to be flush, and then when the lid dries, you can just trim off any of the excess epoxy and get that in place. You can put a dab of Loctite on these or super glue or whatever and make sure they never come out. The only issue I've had is if powder coat gets down into the screw post, you might have to turn it back and forth a couple of times just to clean it out. Other than that, next shot we'll come back with the completed box and show it off. Alright, so here is the finished box. Took all the tape off. Turned out rather nice, if you ask me. Opening it up here, I did run into a small problem with the fuse. I think I broke it, so I just took it off and resoldered it. Gotta be careful with those things. So here with the juice bottle, we're going to go ahead and remove that carefully, hopefully. And I have found that if you grab something sharp, you can just kind of pop that top off. Not trying to cut it or anything, obviously. So I can get your thumbnail in there, and the juice bottle comes out. I'll fill that up here, and hopefully not spill any on my nice white background. Now the RDA I'm using for this is a velocity that I found on Fast Tech, and I'll show that in just a second here. So I'm going to slip that back in and make sure it seals. So since I got a top-down angle here, it should be enough juice to test it. You do want to keep this upright afterwards. I'd say that's probably the only downside of this kind of build. The other two things in, I don't know if see that there's these two silicone O-rings, and that is pretty much the last part of the build here. So with this Velocity RDA, I have one of them wrapped around the very top neck of it here. And I've also gone ahead and replaced it with the hollow positive pin that comes with the RDA. So it's got a hole that goes up into the bottom, and I'll take the cap off in just a second here. Then the second silicone O-ring is actually for going down inside of the 510 connector. And you can kind of see with the camera, I guess, the bottom part of that sticks up just a little bit, and the O-ring goes right in there, and you just sit it right on top. And then when you screw down the atomizer onto it, you'll squish that around the bottom there, and then this one will seal with this kind of beveled edge right at the top of the 510 connector. So we'll get that on there. That squishes down real nice. And I do have a bit of juice on this. So pull that off, and this is kind of a ridiculous build, but it's got two posts. You got to be careful of tightening down the positive a little bit too much. That can go badly, but it's not too bad right now. And I'll try to show on camera the juice coming out of the bottom. So, see if we can get that to pump up there. Yeah, okay, so I've totally overjuiced it at this point. That is actually surprisingly easy to do. And just get that to fit back in there, and throw the cap on. Now, of course, you want to line up the air holes in this. And give it a shot. Okay, so I think I need to build a lower, I think I got this at around 0.4 or something right now. Could definitely go lower with this build and get more vapor out of it. So there you go, Squonk. And of course you can just switch it off there and it won't fire anymore. So there's that. And anytime you need more juice, you just take the lid off, or you can drill a hole in it and squeeze it, and it squonks up some juice. But there we go. So no name box mods, Squonk FET kit. And I'm not going to lay it down.